Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm John Tucker.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
And Karen, the rise in futures and that record for gold comes as we kick off the second quarter. It's also the first time markets are reacting to two important events on Friday when they were closed for the Good Friday holiday. First, the Fed's preferred gauge of underlying inflation cooled last month after an even larger increase than previously reported in January. And then Jay Powell spoke during a San Francisco Fed bank event. The Fed chair reacting to the PCE deflator report and reiterated his outlook on rate cuts.
February is lower, but it's not as low as most of the good readings we got in the second half of last year, but it's definitely more along the lines of what we want to see. What we said is that we don't see it as likely to be appropriate that we would begin to reduce interest rates until the committee, the Federal Open Market Committee, is confident that inflation is moving down to 2% on a sustained basis.
Fed Chair Jay Powell says he also wants to shrink the balance sheet more without disruption.
Well, John, reactions still pouring into Friday's two major events. Sarah House, a senior economist at Wells Fargo.
Ultimately, we heard that right now, Chair Powell doesn't feel like they need to be in a hurry with cutting rates. It is a big decision, as he espoused multiple times throughout the conversation. But what we heard time and again was that he views the economy as strong right now, and particularly the labor market being in a good place, which does seem to afford them some time to see if inflation can come down a bit further in the months ahead.
Wells Fargo senior economist Sarah House does expect rate cuts to begin in June.
The next big economic report for investors, Karen, comes on Friday. That's with the jobs report for the month of March. And according to a Bloomberg survey of economists, payrolls are seen increasing by at least 200,000 for a fourth straight month. The average hourly earnings are projected to climb 4.1% from the same month last year, and that's the smallest annual advance since mid-2021.
Well, we want to turn to politics overseas now, John, and a historic defeat for Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Turkey's state broadcaster TRT is reporting the country's main opposition party defeated the Erdogan's AK party in municipal elections for the first time since he took power more than 2 decades ago. Erdogan told supporters his administration will continue addressing Turkey's pressing economic issues.
We will focus more on the urgent issues of our country, especially the revival of the earthquake zone and solving our economic problems.
And Turkish President Erdogan said in March that this election would be his final after he was elected to a third presidential term last year. Erdogan has also said this result won't hamper his economic plans. The Turkish president has faced backlash from voters as the country experiences rampant inflation and the highest borrowing costs since he swept power 2 decades ago. He's allowed Turkey's central bank to raise the key interest rate to 50%, but it's failed to reverse the trajectory of price increases and has lowered consumer sentiment. The lira weakening in early trading.
Well, back here in the U.S., when Congress comes back from Easter break, aid for Ukraine is on the top of the to-do list. Let's get more from Bloomberg's Ed Baxter.
House Speaker Mike Johnson has promised to bring it to the floor, and Congressman Mike Turner on CBS has heard on Bloomberg says he expects it to move quickly.
The Speaker has made very clear statements that when we get back, it's the next top agenda after having just passed all the bills that fund the federal government. I believe this is going to have overwhelming support in Congress, and we'll put a bill on the president's desk.
Johnson could very well face an ouster move, as it has already been introduced by Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. Democrats have said they would likely save Johnson if Ukraine aid passes. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ed, thanks. Now to the latest on the bridge collapse in Baltimore. Ports along the East Coast are modifying their operations to take in more cargo. Economists say they broadly expect the fallout from the disaster to be contained as other ports work longer hours to take up the slack. Despite that, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg says there's no timeline yet for reopening the Baltimore Channel.
It's not just that you have to remove the wreckage, it's that you have to do it in a way that doesn't cause portions of the bridge that are there across the water to shift. They've been under a lot of compression and tension. They could behave almost like a spring if they are not expertly managed.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg says the reopening of the ports safely is a major priority. He made the comments on CBS's Face the Nation, and you can catch the program Sunday afternoons right here on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, thanks, Karen. A big data breach has been discovered at one of the country's largest telephone operators. We get details in this report from Bloomberg's Jeff Bellinger.
AT&T says personal data from about 73 million current and past account holders was leaked onto the dark web. The company says the data, leaked about 2 weeks ago, includes personal information such as social security numbers and appears to be from 2019 or earlier. The source of the data is still being investigated, and it is not known whether it came from the company or a vendor. AT&T says it has reset the passcodes of about 7.6 million account holders. AT&T is the nation's third largest retail wireless carrier behind Verizon and T-Mobile. In February, the company experienced a widespread outage that took hours to resolve, prompting an investigation by the federal government. Jeff Bellinger, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, thanks, Jeff. And shares of AT&T down almost 2% in early trading.
Well, in Asia, John, a private measure of China's manufacturing expanded in March, and Bloomberg's Brian Curtis has more from Hong Kong.
The Caixin manufacturing PMI rose to 51.1, the highest in more than a year. That was up from 50.9 in February, and it adds to signals that the industrial side of the economy is stabilizing. The official PMI released on Sunday also showed activity expanding last month. That was for the first time since September. But home sales dragged. The value of sales dropping 46% from a year earlier, and that's keeping consumers at bay. In Hong Kong, Brian Curtis, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Brian, thank you. And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is undergoing surgery for hernia as anger mounts against his failure to bring home the hostages still held by Hamas. Families of the hostages joined thousands who demonstrated in Jerusalem demanding a deal to return them home. Horns blared in the largest demonstration seen so far held in Jerusalem since the war began. About 100,000 people were in the streets with anti-government protesters, and many families of the hostages now joining forces. Here in the U.S., the unfolding human catastrophe in Gaza is dividing the Democratic Party. The Biden administration has moved in recent weeks to fulfill agreements to ship more fighter jets and 2,000-pound bombs to Israel, while still waiting for assurances from Netanyahu not to invade Rafah inside Gaza and to increase aid shipments. However, Maryland Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen criticizes the way the Biden administration is handling Israel's war in Gaza.
Netanyahu continues to essentially, give the finger to the President of the United States, and we're sending more bombs. That doesn't make sense.
Senator Van Hollen spoke on ABC's This Week, heard Sundays on Bloomberg. Pope Francis, recovering from respiratory problems, led about 60,000 people in Easter celebrations to make a strong appeal for a ceasefire in Gaza and a prisoner swap between Russia and Ukraine. Francis presided over Easter Sunday Mass in St. Peter's Square. Church services and masses were held across Baltimore on Easter Sunday to remember those who died in the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. Reverend Akko Walker at Sacred Heart of Jesus Church remembered the 6 construction crew workers who were on the bridge and presumed dead.
Yes, we can rebuild the bridge, but we also have to look at the way in which migrant workers are treated and how best we can improve their situation as they come to the United States of America to make the United States of America a better place.
2 other workers survived. In New York, a fire in a Brooklyn church during Easter Sunday services prompted dozens of worshipers to flee the burning building. About 150 people were worshiping in Our Lady of the Rosary of Pompeii when smoke billowed in from a fire in the rectory attached to the rear of the church. This man was one of the worshipers.
So everything go black. So everybody get up. So every time you get out fast, running everybody.
A closed door had kept the fire from spreading from the rectory into the church itself. Fortunately, there were no serious injuries. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Tri-State Audi. Here's John Stashower. John.
Thanks, Karen. NCAA tournament. 4 teams left headed next weekend to Phoenix. Pair of 1 seeds, UConn and Purdue, a 4 seed in Alabama, and Cinderella NC State, an 11 seed, a team that finished in 10th place in the ACC. Surprisingly won the tournament. That's how they got an NCAA invite, and the wins have continued. The Wolfpack upset Duke just as they did at the ACC tourney. 76-64. DJ Burns, 29 points. Purdue got 40 from its big man. Zach Edey got by Tennessee, 72-66. The Vols got 37 in defeat from their All-American Dalton Knecht. NC State women also going to the Final Four. An upset of their own, beating top-seeded Texas. South Carolina, for the second year in a row, will bring a 36-0 record to the Final Four. At the Garden, Knicks took a 10-point lead to the fourth quarter, lost by 1 to Oklahoma City, 113-112. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander won it for the Thunder, scoring with under 2 seconds left. At Barclays, 40 points for 39-year-old LeBron James. Lakers beat the Nets 116-104. The Yankees are 4-0. It's only the 4th time in 74 years they have started a season like that. Juan Soto, big part in all 4 wins in Houston. He was at the plate with 2 outs in the 9th inning of a tie game.
There goes Torres, the third pitch. Line, base hit, left field. How do you like that? Torres scores. The Yankees take a 4-3 lead. Oh, is he good? Oh, do we love Soto.
On WFAN, what's not to love? Soto hitting .529. The Mets' first 0-3 start in a decade. Milwaukee won again at Citi Field, 4-1. Red Sox won in Seattle. Nationals gave up 3 in the 9th. Lost in Cincinnati. Yannick Sinner won the tennis in Miami. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Karen, John.
All right, John, thank you. And futures are rising this morning. S&P futures up 1/3% or 20 points. Dow futures up 0.3% or 111 points. NASDAQ futures up 0.5% or 100 points. And the 10-year Treasury up 3/32, the yield 4.18%.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
And it's 5:14 on Wall Street. This morning marks the first day of trading since we received the Fed's preferred gauge of underlying inflation. That's the Core Personal Consumption Expenditures Index. We also got comments from Jay Powell on Friday. Right now, let's get you set up for the trading day. And I'm happy to say we're joined in studio by Lori Calvasina, head of U.S. Equity Strategy at RBC Capital Markets. Pleasure to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Core PCE cooled. I guess that's the takeaway. What is this what traders have been waiting for?
So, look, I don't think there are any major surprises here from my end. I mean, we've generally been looking for a moderation in inflation at RBC. Our guys cautioned me very early, in the year, late last year, that there are going to be some bumps in the road. And for now, the thesis still seems to be intact, and our guys still think we're headed for June cuts.
June cuts, and what after that? How many cuts this year?
So we originally had been looking for 5 as a house. They've dialed it down now to 3. I will say our guys were never in the March camp, so I think we've had less distance to travel to get to where our current assumptions are. So we haven't really been, overly, kind of negative reacting to some of the negative adjustments that have happened, kind of the dialing down of expectations. But they think the Fed wants to get started, and then we'll go slow.
The Fed has a gigantic balance sheet. They're starting to trim it. Should we be worried about that? Will that have much of an impact in markets, or can they handle that in such a way that it's going to have a minimal impact?
It's funny. I'm a little bit of a data nerd, and we had done some analysis.
We like that, Laura.
I know. It's kind of my thing. But, there had been a period of time post-GFC where the Fed balance sheet really seemed to be driving the PE multiple in the S&P 500. That really broke down last year. I think the Fed has done a good job of sort of pushing, the balance sheet to sort of the side from an equity market perspective. It's just not as in focus and as much of a driver as it used to be.
End of the quarter, much in terms of rebalancing in portfolios, and how's that impacting things?
So look, I think at the end of the quarter, we saw some funny moves. From my perspective, what I thought was interesting was that the Russell 2000 had a strong finish. And so the idea that we've really been looking for signs that the leadership rotation in the market is going to get underway, to me, that was the most sort of interesting kind of short-term stuff we saw at the end of the quarter. And I think this market is itching to rotate. rotate. Anything I put out on the Mag 7, I feel like that's the chart everybody looks for. I think there's a lot of, sort of concern that we've had some false starts on that leadership rotation, but I think investors are ready to do something different. So that's what I'd be looking for going forward.
Leadership rotation, that's a healthy sign for markets?
I think it is. I think we're due for one big catch-up trade in the market from, kind of everything outside of the Mag 7, whether it's small cap, whether it's, kind of the non-tech sectors. If you look at the PE in the market X the Mag 7, it's trading around 16 times. The Mag 7's been trading between 27 and 28 times on a forward PE, and kind of around past peaks. So I think there's room for the rest of the market to kind of catch up. I'm not saying we have to get quite that overvalued, but there's room for the rest of the market to make a move.
Do you see conflicting cross currents in markets? What are they, if you do?
So I would say on the positive side, GDP forecasts have moved up tremendously since the start of the year, kind of moved us back into a range that's typically favorable for stocks from one, kind of a sluggish range that was anticipated to start the year as lousy for stocks. We've moved out of that. But sentiment is pretty enthusiastic right now, whether you're looking at AAII survey or the weekly CFTC data. So I do expect to get a pullback at some point in time, but I've been looking for one for a while and we haven't gotten it yet.
You're a little more neutral on risk. Does that indicate some degree of bearishness on your part? About 30 seconds.
Yeah, I would say, look, we're not in the bear camp. We do feel like the market is fairly priced at this particular moment, though.
All right, just give me a preview of earnings in 10 seconds.
So, look, it's going to be all about margins and how good companies are at expanding them. We're modeling flat, but there's room for upside.
Okay, and your year-end price target for the S&P 500. I'll throw one more in for you, Lori.
Okay.
What is it?
We're at 5,300, and we just nudged that up. Some of our models can get us to around 5,400 or a little bit higher.
Lori Calvasina, head of U.S. Equity Strategy at RBC Capital Markets, in studio with us this morning. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, Sirius XM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm John Tucker.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.